Citation of Professor Gabriel Olatunde Babawale. Today's Afrikanwatch Network 12th lecture, titled Arise, O Compatriots, in the Spirit of Building One Nation, will be delivered by a well-known professor of political economy, whose experience and exposure are indeed enviable and admirable. Professor Gabriel Olatunde Babawale of the Department of Political Science, the University of Lagos. Interestingly, Professor Babawale delivered the 2018 Afrikanwatch Annual Lecture titled "Should the Labor of Our Heroes Past Be in Vain?", which has remained one of the most highly documented reference lectures of all time. Between 1977 and 1985, Gabriel Babawale earned 2 prestigious academic honors as a student and scholar at the University of Ife, now Obafemi Awolowo University, OAU, where he won the Departmental Scholarship Grant for Best Overall Graduate Performance at the Department of International Relations during the 1983 and 84 session. In 1991, he was appointed Lecturer Grade 1 by the University of Lagos, and indeed, he proved his capacity and diligence to duty, a feat that resulted in his elevation as a professor of political economy in 2005, backdated to 2002. His proficiency in teaching and research earned him various recognitions, even within and outside the university environment. In fact, he was voted the best lecturer in the Department of Political Science, University of Lagos, by the students in a widely carried out survey conducted during the 2003 and 2004 academic session. He was the founding editor and, until 2006, managing editor of the reputable UNILAG Journal of Politics. Professor Babawale has consulted widely for local and international non-governmental organizations such as UNESCO and the African Union. And he has also coordinated research funded by agencies such as the Ford Foundation and the MacArthur Foundation. He has manned numerous administrative roles, including Secretary of the Academic Staff Union of University, ASU, the University of Lagos branch, 1993 to 1996. Assistant Dean of Student Affairs, UNILAG, 1998 to 2000. And Dean of Student Affairs, 2014 to 2016. He was the chairman of the Ford Foundation Grant Committee for the Department of Political Science, same university, from 2002 to 2006, and chairman of the Intellectual Nodal Contact Committee, a committee set up by the Vice Chancellor of the University of Lagos to enhance the implementation of the university's strategic plan 2005 to 2006. Professor Babawale is a prolific author who has contributed over 120 papers to learned local and international journals, international conference proceedings, and technical papers. He has published 21 books and 7 monographs to date. He is a member of many learned societies and academic associations, including the Nigerian Political Science Association, the History Society of Nigeria, and the Third World Forum, amongst others. In August 2006, he was appointed Director General of the Center for Black and African Arts and Civilization, a parastatal under the then Federal Ministry of Tourism, Culture and National Orientation. In less than 4 years, he transformed the then 24-year-old center into a world-class arts and culture agency. During this period, the center organized and hosted 8th international conferences for academic experts on African and diaspora studies, both within and outside Nigeria. He also helped in the strengthening of Nigeria-Brazil cultural relations by facilitating the signing of an MOU between the two countries in Abuja, Nigeria, on March 15, 2010. Professor Babawale served as a member of the Administrative Visitation Panel set up by the state government at Adekunle Ajasin University, Akungba, Akoko, Ondo State in 2009. In 2017, he was appointed to serve as an electoral commissioner in the Lagos State Independent Electoral Commission, LASIEC, where he was until his appointment in 2001 as the Provost of the Anti-Corruption Academy of Nigeria, ACAN, the training and research arm of the Independent Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offences Commission, ICPC. Expectedly, he has received numerous recognitions, awards, and honors both locally and internationally, some of which include the Dr. Kwame Nkrumah Outstanding Leadership Merit Award in 2008, the Obafemi Awolowo Alumni Association Excellence in Public Service Award in 2010, the Distinguished Public Service Award of the University of Texas, Houston, United States of America in 2012, the African Gold Merit Award in 2018, and being inducted into the Afrikanwatch Hall of Prominence in 2022, amongst all those several others. He is married and has children. Surely, this commentary will be incomplete if we do not pay tribute to some eminent Nigerians who have delivered Afrikanwatch Network lectures in the past. They include Dr. Tunji Abayomi, a constitutional lawyer and human rights activist, Colonel Barrister Abayomi Dare retired, former Director, Nigerian Army Legal Services, Mr. Dennis Amakre, MON, a retired DSS Director, General Dr. Oviemo Ovaje, OFR, retired, ex-Medical Director, Military Hospital, Ikoyi, Professor Timothy Ate, a Professor of International Law and Jurisprudence, Professor Solomon Akinboye, a Professor of Political Science, University of Lagos, Dr. Utive Ibuzo, Founder, Center for Democratic Governance, Dr. M.K. Ladipo, former Rector, Yaba College of Technology, amongst others. May we now invite Professor Gabriel Babawale to deliver the Afrikanwatch Network's 12th lecture titled Arise, O Compatriots, in the Spirit of Building One Nation.
Thank you very much, the Master of Ceremony. Let me begin by recognizing the very eminent chairman of this particular occasion, Dr. Tunji Abayomi, a very respected elder and an activist in his own right. He is accompanied by his very amiable wife. You are welcome, ma. I also like to recognize the presence of the Director General of the Nigerian Institute of Legislative and Democratic Studies, Professor Abubakar Suleiman, who is ably represented by my brother, my friend, my colleague from LASU, who is there on leave of absence, Dr. Adewale Aderemi. I also want to recognize Dr. Modebelu, the chairman of the editorial board of the Afrikanwatch Network. I must not fail to recognize some of my very senior colleagues and colleagues who are here from the University of Lagos. Permit me for being partial. I would have recognized you if I know your name, but I can see the immediate past. Okay, still the current Dean of School of Postgraduate Studies is going to be awarded some honor today, Professor Shuneye. I also see my sister and neighbor before, Professor Yemisi Oba Shorojon. My colleague in the department, Professor Akimboye Solomon, who is here. And of course, our very big brother, Professor Foga. It's my pleasure to see you here. And our brother from CDHR, Ogomado, who is here. You are welcome, sir. If I do not mention your name, please forgive me. I would like to save time, and also, like people always say in this part of the world, and I think it's now being repeated almost everywhere, I want to adopt existing protocol. May I thank Mark and his team for this very wonderful event that they have put together. It has become a ritual as it is for him to put up a good show. It's a young man that I admire his doggedness, his tenacity, his commitment to the country, his vision, all of this. And that's why it's very irresistible when it contacts you to be part of a program. You hardly find it, you very find it difficult to say no. Each time Mark approaches me, even when I have a very busy schedule, I will still create time out of no time. So congratulations on another successful outing today. We are just seeing the beginning. By the time we leave here, as the Pentecostalists always say, we will never remain the same again. The title that I've been given is Arise, O Compatriots, in the spirit of building a nation. But I slightly tweaked it to read Arise, O Compatriots, together we build one nation. I have decided to do that tweaking because I believe that it's a collective task. The task of building one Nigerian nation is a collective endeavor of all of us. We should not leave it to anybody. Nation building is a task that cannot be left to politicians alone. Every person, every stakeholder in this enterprise known as Nigeria must be part of it. I have divided my presentation into about 4 different sections. I start with an introduction, and I have followed it with pointing out what I have described as the crises and contradictions in Nigerian federalism, and moved on to talk about what needs to be done before I finally conclude. In my introduction, I pointed out that it is not a coincidence that the first line of the first stanza of our national anthem and the first line of the title of this presentation begin with Arise, O Compatriots. The organizers of this event chose this line deliberately as the title of the presentation in order to underscore the imperative of unity as a prerequisite for nation building. You cannot build a nation that is divided because everybody will be pulling it from all sides, and that is the experience of Nigeria, tragically. Nation building, in my view, presupposes the coming together of a people who are of disparate ethnicities, who have diverse origins, who have diverse cultures and histories and languages and religions within the boundaries of a state. Their effort to evolve into a united entity is what I have called nation building. Nigeria, as we all know, is a country of multiple nationalities. And all of these nationalities are struggling ceaselessly, tirelessly, to evolve into a nation and develop what we call a national identity. Indeed, our founding fathers late Chief Obafemi Awolowo, late Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, late Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, have all said that Nigeria has not become a nation. And we thought that years after independence will have become one, but we have not. Indeed, Awolowo is reputed to have described it as a mere geographical expression. And that you don't have a nation in the context or in the fashion of the Welsh or of these other countries that they can call themselves a nation. We are pulling from different directions. This search for a national identity is what some have called providing answers to the national question. Now, we have been rattled, we have been riddled with the problems of corruption, the problem of insecurity, the problem of a declining economy. And apart from these problems, we have also had the challenge of the need to restructure the country, the need to devolve power. All of these have been concerns of various groups of individuals. In recent years, there is a consensus now, which is emerging in my view. And that consensus is that the Nigerian state in its present form is not working. All of us are agreed on that the Nigerian state in its present form has not worked and is not working. It has become dysfunctional. It has become ineffective. It has become inefficient, and therefore incapable of meeting the needs and aspirations of a larger majority of the population, cutting across religious, regional, ethnic, and class boundaries. In other words, it is clear that the dysfunctionality of the nation or the country called Nigeria is responsible largely for many of the problems and the overwhelming disunity that we suffer from. And unless we address this question of bringing us together, the people, to have a common purpose, to have a sense of belonging, a sense of oneness, we will continue to search for the elusive national development that our founding fathers also tried to search for. Now, the advocates of restructuring for the enthronement of what some have called true federalism are now winning so many converts. Almost everybody now knows that Nigeria needs to be restructured. And we have had organizations, regional organizations like the Ohanese from the southeast, the Afenifere from the southwest, the Middle Belt Forum from the north central, the Pan-Niger Delta Forum from the south-south. All of them have called for a reordering of relations, a restructuring of the entity known as Nigeria. Indeed, prominent figures, I've mentioned them, like even Babangida, Atiku, and the former APC governors before the present administration, have also joined the call for a restructured Nigeria. Now, what do I understand by restructuring and power devolution? I say there are two sides of the same coin, and I believe we can not validly talk about devolution of powers in a state outside the context of restructuring. Restructuring is an imperative when you are talking about a federal state. And why is it a compelling necessity? It is because the true nature of federalism, which talks about regional government, component units, different ethnicities, multinationalities, multi-languages, multiculturalism, all of this demand that you constantly negotiate with those groups to be able to bring about peace and stability. If you don't, the end result can be calamitous. And what have we witnessed? The end result of not attending to these particular needs and demands and agitations is the insurgency that we are faced with, the tales of banditry that we are witnessing today, and of course, rising incidents of kidnappings and all other forms of criminality. All of these can be partly and largely traced to the fact that we have not attended to the demands and the agitations of the various groups, and instead of negotiating with them, we keep saying that Nigeria's unity is not negotiable. And that's a lie, because even marriage can be negotiated and renegotiated. Because it is when you are negotiation is foreclosing a marriage that you have a divorce. So in order for us to avoid a divorce, we must constantly negotiate the terms of our engagement, the terms of our association as a people. Now, Federalism was the administrative system chosen by our founding fathers because they felt it is the most appropriate for our circumstance. And what does it mean? It is generally described as a form of organization of a state which involves a bifurcation of political power within a polity, such that the central, or what you call the federal government, has its area of authority well defined in the Constitution, vis-a-vis that of the powers of the constituent unit. And each of these levels of government will possess the wherewithal for its sustenance under some form of fiscal autonomy. In other words, we are speaking of two levels of equal government that are separate, that are independent, that have coordinate authorities possessing legislative and enforcement jurisdiction within their respective spheres. The distribution of powers in a federal state is therefore aimed at two things. One, safeguarding local identities or interests, and two, also safeguarding individual liberties. And this is why the man who is known to be the classical theorist on federalism, Casey Ware, defines it as a method of dividing powers so that general and regional governments are each within each sphere coordinate and independent. Meaning that you have two levels of government, the central, the regional, all of them are coordinate. They are not operating in a subordinate relationship. And this is the crux of the problem with our federalism. Because what we have is a center that is superordinate, that exercises a preponderance of power over the other regions, and the other regions, the other component units are subordinate to the center. That creates its own tension, and that's responsible for the agitation that we have had. As I said, federalism is known worldwide as a system of maintaining unity in diversity, as well as ensuring oneness in a situation where you have multi-ethnicities, multi-religions, and of course, multi-nations. In the Nigerian context, where we have heterogeneous populations and nationalities with multiple cultures, federalism gives us the opportunity, provides the vehicle for ensuring peaceful cohabitation and peaceful coexistence. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, our hopes were raised in the immediate post-independent years that our federalism will be strengthened and that we will have the institutionalization of power devolution through the instrumentality of the 1963 Constitution. But hopes were dashed sooner than later. My view, some believe that it is because the 1963 Constitution did not work. That's why the First Republic collapsed. But I believe that the primary cause of the collapse of the federal arrangement in the First Republic was not really the Constitution itself, but rather the subversion of that Constitution. Because the Constitution wanted a proper federalism, but we had a situation in which the central government at that time wanted to dominate the region, and that led to the crisis that we had. So the government at the center embarked on what I call the destructive mission of trying to dominate the regions in defiance of the principles of federalism. Of course, I need not say, because this is self-evident, that when the military took over from 1966 until much later, when we had the civil rule that had become almost uninterrupted since 1999, what the military succeeded in doing is to subvert Nigerian federalism on a very consistent basis. In fact, what they did was to centralize Nigerian federalism. And one of the strategies adopted by the military was to throw some things at us. They knew that our people wanted states, and so they were giving us states. The more states you create, the weaker Nigeria's federalism became. This is part of the centralizing trend in Nigerian federalism, which the military brought about. So my presentation would explore this issue of forging a united entity out of the several nationalities that make up the Nigerian state. I then call your attention to the crises and contradictions in Nigerian federalism. Some of them I have mentioned, but let me quickly note a few ones. That when Nigeria was brought into existence by the British in 1960 at independence, it was evident that the state did not represent the interests of the various nationalities. It was when Nigeria was brought into existence that they now brought the component units together instead of being the other way around. It should have been the component units that subscribed to the idea of creating a unified entity, which would have given them greater autonomy than they had. But because it was the central that actually brought all the other ones together by force, we have had this tension that we have had over the years. Again, the structural imperfections that we had in the federalism that was imposed on us at independence was such that they emphasized division among our people, rivalry, suspicion, hostility, and even the foster elite that took over power did not help matters. Instead of addressing these points of division, they magnified them. And why did they magnify them? They needed to magnify them to be able to continue in office, claiming to represent their people when they are representing their own interests. So subnationalism or ethnicity constitute a major plank in any discussion about the Nigerian state and the character of its politics. The various ethnic groups brought together by the force of arms at the independence, at the inception of colonial rule, have not resolved their mutually suspicious relationship, largely as a result of the inability of the system and its practitioners to develop the means, the strategies, and modalities where we can bring about an equitable distribution of resources. Again, political opportunism. You know, in Nigeria, we have so many opportunities for political opportunism, especially by the political class. And this opportunism of a criminally decadent and corrupt power elite has no doubt distorted the political structure of the Nigerian state. Not only did it do that, it perverted the political culture, perverted also and destroyed progressive political values in our country. Indeed, today, we have lost our value system, not just in the larger society, but more especially in politics, to the point that what matters is winning elections. People have forgotten that political parties are not set up just to win elections. Important as that is, they are brought together for the purpose of acquiring political power. But that is not the end of what political party is all about. Political parties have what you call non-power functions that they must perform: educating the citizenry, setting agenda for government, thinking about the future of the country, and providing ideas, generating ideas. These are some of the functions of political parties. But we believe that this is a special purpose vehicle set up to acquire power, and once you can't get it, that's the end. We must go beyond that. So, what am I therefore saying? When when we acquired independence and the First Republic collapsed, the military came into office. The military imposed on us what has become known as the 1999 Constitution, but which lawyers call Decree number 24 of 1999. And that Constitution has been found to be inadequate. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. The inadequacy of that Constitution to address what has been known as the national question has become a major issue and a major point of concern for very radical and public-spirited lawyers. And what are the problems? It has not defined in clear terms the nature and spheres of political authority. That's number one. Number two, it has not provided for genuine autonomy of the constituent units. And thirdly, it has not provided a guarantee for the rights of citizens in the larger context of a democratic framework. And this has led to numerous conflicts and crises of the at the socio-economic, religious, and political levels. Consequently, with such expectations not being met, the people resorted to venting their disappointment through violence. And violence has been our lot. Earlier on, I talked about the structural imperfections, structural distortions within the Nigerian federal entity. And one of the things that we need to note is that when Nigeria was brought into existence, you had structural imbalance. You had 3 regions, but one of the regions was bigger than the size of the other 2. That is a recipe for disaster. Because when you say democracy is a game of numbers, and one one entity is about the size of the others put together, you have already laid this foundation for instability, because there is likely to be constant domination by this, and that has been the experience. Now, this lopsided federal arrangement paved the way for the domination of the power structure by one region, with the remaining two other regions complaining about that domination. The British colonial administration, after creating that kind of imperfect structure deliberately, later resorted to the use of divide and rule tactics, because they played one group against the other. Indeed, they treated the elites of the different regions differently. Some were treated like mistresses, while others were treated like adversaries, depending on where their interest lies. When they feel that you are likely to take to their dictates and accept whatever they give, they make friends with you, especially those in the South who are found to be very educated. The British did not like them, and they showed hostility to them. I quote James Coleman, who is one of the foremost authorities. He wrote the book Background to Nationalism. The artificiality of Nigeria's boundaries and the sharp cultural differences among its people point up the fact that Nigeria is a British creation. No question about that. And the concept of a Nigerian nation is the result of the British presence. The need now is for us to transcend that and create our own nation, not after what the British created, but one, thank you, sir, one that will reflect our interests, one that will reflect our aspirations, and would also take care of the hopes of our people. However, even in spite of this problem that we had, I believe that Nigeria's problem was compounded by the kind of individuals that have been at the helm of affairs. And we are hoping that with what looks like a change in government and a new tempo that we have in the administration of the country, something good may yet come out of Nigeria. Indeed, instead of forging the various entities into a United Nations, I've said that the British decided to create us, to manipulate our differences and in fact accentuate those differences. I made the point that the structural imperfections are even expressed in graphic terms. When you look at the size of the different entities and how these differ. Again, when population census was conducted, a particular region had over 50%, when all the others put together had less than just about 47 or 45%. All of these create the basis for instability. So what do we do? I think together we can build a nation. There is no doubt that we require a radical restructuring, which includes proper devolution of powers to the component units of the Federation, in order to enhance unity, equity, and justice in the Federation, and stem the tide of division, tide of acrimony, and the lack of a sense of nationhood, which seem to be eroding the nation's fragile unity. Now, the distortions that characterize our federalism has called into question the very basis of our existence as a nation. These have also resulted in increasing agitations for restructuring. Thank you. Thank you very much. Although there is hardly any ideal federal state, it is a fact that is universally acknowledged that any nation which comprises heterogeneous populations, nationalities with multiple cultures, wishing to cohabit in peace, must adopt a form of federalism adapted to suit its own situation and its own circumstance. Although Nigeria's founding fathers had that consensus that we should have a federalism, unfortunately, our federalism has taken a beating over the years and has been progressively tortured and pruned to become an administrative semi-fit, if not an aberration. Instead of being hinged on structural balance, it is hinged on structural imbalance and geographical imbalance. instead of fiscal federalism, what we have witnessed since independence has been fiscal centralism, especially after the collapse of the First Republic. This is contrary to the original consensus, which informed the Macpherson Constitution, the Littleton Constitution, the Independence Constitution, and the Republican Constitution. So, what does restructuring entail? Some have said there is no need for restructuring. Some have even said they don't understand what restructuring means. I think we are hiding behind a finger. For me, any entity that has a multiplicity of nationalities like ours, and in some occasions will become maladjusted, there will be misalignment. So you need to realign, you need to readjust, you need to redesign. That is the reason why we are talking about restructuring. This reordering will necessitate the making of an entirely new constitution to replace the existing one, which to all intents and purposes is irredeemably pro-unitarism. The present constitution is a unitary constitution. So there is no way, as lawyers will say, you cannot put something on nothing. You cannot put a unitary constitution on a federal entity and expect that there will be peace and stability. So there will be a need to change that constitution. The new constitution will ensure that we have proper autonomy for the component unit, reduce the power that goes to the center, reduce the resources that go to the center, reduce those items that are on the exclusive legislative list, as we witnessed in the First Republic, so that at the end of the day, we are going to witness peace and stability, and each part of the federation can grow at its own pace, and we are going to have a healthy competition, not everybody wanting to go to the center, instead of focusing on what you have within your region. All of us, we know that every time we complain about government, we seem to forget that there are governments at the state and local government levels. That is because of the kind of behemoth we have made of the federal government. Nobody queries what governors do. Some governors sit permanently in Abuja for the better part of the year and no protests in their states. So how do we expect development when everybody is looking forward to what happens in the villa? What we don't know is that in America today, a larger majority of the American people are not seriously concerned about who becomes president. I don't know if you know that. They don't bother about who becomes president. They are more interested in their immediate locality, the state government, those in the counties, the mayors. And that should be our focus, because those should be the areas of focus of development. Why do we have a federal ministry of agriculture? Where are the farms belonging to the federal government? It's unnecessary duplication, a means of siphoning money. And I want to reveal to us today that successively we have used this centralization of power at the hands of the federal government to waste money. Those who study budget have been doing that in the last 3 years. My center has been doing that, studying the budget critically. We have found out that one of the areas of waste and where money is stolen most in Nigeria is through that Ministry of Agriculture. Ministry of Agriculture has become a conduit. And I will give you a few examples. There are agencies in the Ministry of Agriculture that you have never heard of. I don't know whether you have heard of Institute of Freshwater Fish. It exists. And it has a huge budget. You have the Institute of Horticulture. Now, what will shock you is that in 2022, you also have Nigeria's Third Product Research Institute, NISPRI. It has a guest house very close to Unilag. That NISPRI is based in Ilorin. But last year, 2022, it had a capital budget of 26 billion naira. Go and check it out. As Rufai of Arise will say, fact check me. It has a capital budget of 26 billion naira. Only, I think, University of Maiduguri and one other first generation university had a capital budget that got up to 1 billion. All the others less than a billion. But that institute that you don't know about had a budget of 26 billion. That's for capital. I don't know whether you know that they have federal cooperative colleges all over the country. There is one in Enugu which is called Federal Cooperative College, Oji River. It had a capital budget of 36 billion last year. Now, so this is what we witness on a daily basis. In this year 2023 budget, you have an allocation of 130 billion for solar-powered street lights. You have the same allocation of about 130 billion for the Ministry of Transportation. The Ministry of Power has barely something above 200 and something billion. And the allocation to solar-powered street light is 130 billion. Now, so these are some of the things we are going to talk about as I round up very soon. So I was talking about restructuring, and I also said that the reordering will necessitate the making of an entirely new constitution. And I said that restructuring will involve a renegotiation of a proper federal structure that must be seen to be addressing the grievances of all its component units. Otherwise, the agitations for autonomy, for self-determination, or even secession will intensify. It hardly makes sense that issues pertaining to policing, railways, prisons, criminal records are still on the exclusive legislative list in the 1999 Constitution. In other climes where sanity reigns supreme, that is not so. Such matters reside in the concurrent rail. There is no reason why states cannot control their own prisons. And you can see what we have witnessed in the hands of a state-controlled correctional service. Jailbreaks all the time. And it is strange that you have intelligence service in a country and people are planning how to free inmates on a regular, consistent basis, and they never know until the act is carried out. That's a shame. That means this body that is called federal government is biting more than it can chew. So, in doing that, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chairman, I believe that with the inauguration of the President Bola Ahmed Tinubu-led administration, Nigerians expect that we are going to have a new wind of change blowing across the political and economic landscape of the country. It is our hope. There is a widespread feeling of euphoria that the new sheriff is in town to bring about changes that will rescue the country from years of lethargy and years of stagnation and immobilism, especially in the areas of restructuring and the rejuvenation of the economy. So what does Tinubu need to do? I think, first of all, it must promote unity. It must promote unity in diversity. It must also improve on the economy, especially the very dangerous and scary indicators that we have now have to be corrected. Most economic indicators attest to the crisis facing the Nigerian state. Unemployment figures stand at around 33%. Inflation has risen to 24% by May. And the naira has geometrically depreciated against the dollar and has in fact lost about 290% of its value over the past 8 years. What is more, Nigeria is now tagged the poverty capital of the world. So we expect him to reverse that trend. Poverty, which is an increasing function of unemployment and consumption, is at a frightening level in our country. The Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, this is official, says that in a survey it conducted in 2022, 63% of persons living in Nigeria, that's about 133 million, are multidimensionally poor. It further pointed out that the survey also indicated that close to 2/3 of the people That's 86 million. Of these 133 million are actually living in the northern part of Nigeria. Do you now wonder why we have insurgency, banditry, kidnappings, and how and why they have become so rampant in the northern part of the country? There is a link between these declining economic indices and rising state of criminality. And unless we break that umbilical cord between disturbing economic indices and rising criminality, we are not likely to have peace. This is a task that the Tinubu administration has to face. The administration has a job cut out for it. It needs to reverse this ugly trend and must immediately begin the implementation of an economic recovery agenda that is geared towards improving the lives of the average Nigerian. Nigeria must become more productive. We have become a rentier state over time. And what you have as the major problem facing a rentier state is the increasing level of corruption and waste. By the time we go into what happened in the last 8 years, I know what the anti-corruption agencies have discovered. I work for one. It is enough to make some 5 African countries put together rich. What individuals have stolen. And I'm not exaggerating, because if you recall that the Accountant General of the Federation is accused of having stolen 109 billion. Not 109 billion pennies. Even that would be humongous. So, there is a lot to be done. We must diversify our economy in the real sense of the word. We must invest resources and manpower in agriculture. We must begin a fast-paced industrialization process. There is no country that can develop without industries. Nigeria is the only country that I see which thinks it can develop by deindustrializing. Because all the industries that we had in Lagos, in Ibadan, some 30 years ago, have all collapsed. And we think we can make it as a country. So we have to go back to that process. And you cannot industrialize without generating power. So all of this must be brought together. These are the tasks before the government. Again, I think there is a major issue that faces us now, and I think this government realizes it. It is tragic that we now have an albatross of a heavy debt burden across the country's neck. When the last administration took over in June 2015, it inherited a debt portfolio of 12.1 trillion naira. And don't forget, as at that time, it was about 198 to the dollar, isn't it? Today, according to the Debt Management Office, our debt stands at a staggering 77 trillion. And is now the rate of, is it 600 and something to the dollar? So you can now know that even that 77 trillion is conservative. It is far bigger than that. The situation is disturbing and needs to be urgently reversed. At the level of security, which is a major problem, insecurity is fast pushing us into the realm of a failed state. A failed state emerges when anomic groups challenge the authority of the sovereign state. The sovereign state acquires its sovereignty and boasts of it because of its monopoly of the force of coercion. But the moment that monopoly of the force of coercion is challenged by other groups, that state is failing. Because when a group can enter into a classroom and capture about 400 people and drive them in trucks without anybody apprehending them, you are failing your responsibility as a state. Even the Constitution recognizes that the safety, the security, and welfare of the people is the primary purpose of government. So security is a very important issue. We need to stamp out terrorism and banditry. Again, we must ensure that culprits of terrorism, culprits of banditry are openly tried. I don't know whether I'm the only person that is not seeing them. I'm not seeing anybody being brought before the court of law to say this man was involved in banditry. And the government has left undone what it should do. And this is our appeal to the new administration. There is a need to run an inclusive government, an inclusive and develop an inclusive strategy to security. And what do I mean by inclusive strategy? Bring in the stakeholders. What do I mean by bringing in the stakeholders? In many of our communities, the people, the traditional institutions, know where the bandits live. They know where the insurgents live. But they have kept mute because they have lost faith in government. So we must return that trust in government back to the people to secure their buy-in and work with them in order to have collective security. Without that, we'll be daydreaming. As you are aware now, in the northern part of the country, because I live most of the time in Abuja now, parents take their children, their female children, to bandits to spend 1 week or 2 weeks for protection. Some even take their wives, give them to bandits for some time, and then they are returned back. For them to be able to work on their farms, they have to pay the bandits to guarantee security because they don't have confidence in the Nigerian security system. And you cannot tell the Nigerian security agencies about the location and the activities of insurgents because you will be revealed as the informant. And the next minute you are dead, like Dodo. So again, these are some of the things that I think we need to do. Now I'm into my conclusion. As I mentioned earlier, restructuring and devolution of powers are two sides of the same coin. It is, however, difficult to talk about power dissolution without restructuring. As I said before, restructuring can be described as readjustment, realignment, repositioning, redesigning of a particular system. And all man-made structures are prone to maladjustment, are prone to misalignment over a period of time, especially in multi-ethnic and multinational society. Nigeria, being a collection of different nations, artificially cobbled together by British colonialism, suffers from the lack of a sense of national identity. This is understandable. This is understandable from the point of view of the fact that nations that make up Nigeria have not always existed under a single entity. What I think we need to do to address the problem is as follows. First, we need to restructure, as I've said, power relations. Two, we need to devolve more powers to the states and local government and give them the resources to march. And then we must have a situation in which Nigeria would ensure that those functions that are issue of foreign relations, currency, and so on will be given to the central government, and other matters will be left to those at the local level. This also includes or involves the restructuring of the revenue allocation formula. We cannot solve all these problems and become one nation when we do not have a sense of identity and embrace those symbols that are suggestive or that promote supranationality. We must begin to teach our children more about those symbols like the national flag, the national anthem. We must also begin to teach in our schools, namely human dignity, voice and participation, patriotism, integrity, personal responsibility, professionalism, and national unity. We need to promote these at every level of our society, especially in our schools. As I said before, as I conclude now, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chairman, as corruption becomes widespread, it erodes the ethical and moral order of our society. Even our youths are now infected by the virus. Once corruption intensifies, society decays, violence spreads, and further deepens the decomposition of the state. The danger facing our country is that we have carelessly put ourselves in a quagmire and need to find urgent means of retrieving our country from the perilous situation. The reality of state failure stares us in the face and must be a matter of grave concern for our intellectuals and scholars. I think we need to take specific steps to reduce the cost of governance. It is no longer business as usual. It doesn't make sense that one man is going on an inspection visit and has 20 cars. Recently, we saw a video where a governor had 60-something cars in his convoy. Each of them now, to fill those cars, will be about 50,000. So you can imagine what it takes to fill the tanks of those vehicles. We need to cut that. We also need to cut down this idea of agencies that are duplicating responsibility. I've just told you, you have close to 40 parastatals under the Federal Ministry of Agriculture alone. What are they all doing? I've just told you that we have an Institute of Freshwater Fish. Maybe there's an Institute of Old or Stale Water Fish. So, specific steps ought to be taken to reduce the cost of governance, check waste, enhance governmental efficiency, and make the states more viable. The report of the Committee on Restructuring, which the APC governor set up in 2018, should be revisited by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu for immediate implementation, especially of those areas that do not require constitutional amendment. The National Assembly's aborted move to enact a bill on the establishment of state police must also be revisited and pursued to a logical conclusion. That way, we are going to make policing a community affair, a local affair. It makes sense. It does not make sense for you to expect that there is crime in a part of Okokomaiko, and you bring somebody who is from Taraba to come and find the criminals. He cannot. He doesn't know the terrain. He doesn't speak the language. So nobody is going to cooperate with him. When we were growing up, intelligence was a key aspect of policing. As a small boy in the village, small boy, 5 years. Sometimes my parents will be saying, they will be discussing among themselves, CID. They say CID is in town. And nobody will know them. So everybody will sit up when they say CID is around. Do we still have CIDs? I'm not sure. Even if they exist, they are not as effective as they used to be. Finally, I wish to propose that civil society organizations take the lead in the continued advocacy for the refederalization of Nigeria by insisting that the Tinubu administration must make restructuring the fulcrum of its program. This will imply the following. 1, a true federal arrangement that respects the individualities of the component units and the rights of minorities. 2, justice, equity, and fairness in the distribution of power and allocation of resources. 3, a participatory and inclusive governance system. And 4, the observance of the rule of law and due process. And finally, respect for civil liberties and fundamental rights of citizens. I thank you all for your attention.
Thank you, thank you, thank you so much, sir. Wow, what well doctor.
Please, let's keep clapping. Let's keep clapping.
Let's keep clapping till he gets to his seat. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, our guest speaker, the person of Professor Gabriel Olatunde
Mr. Chairman, want to say something?
Before we have to.
Okay, let's quickly just run through and recognize some of our guests here. Mr. Chairman, please hold on for us, please. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, sir. Perhaps we'll just allow you to do that before.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Well, we should be proud as a nation for the quality of the minds of our people. I want to celebrate you for your distinction and your, in my book, State and Citizens, which was written in my longest detention for 1 year. The picture is State and Citizens. There is a huge house. That is the state. You see the state, but you cannot see the citizens. In reality, what we should see is the citizen before we see the state. But in our nation, we see the state is huge. I would like you to be a little patient. You are actually at a very serious point. Everybody admits that this nation is functional. It's completely unsatisfactory. It's not fulfilling the aspiration of our citizens. is disorderly, is ununited, is failing. That's the truth. So, change will only be brought about by the citizens of Nigeria. And that is the essence of this lecture. I'm emphasizing this because a lot of the awardees that we are celebrating today have made their contributions. So they are time and they are the tide of this mission. I think it was one of the philosophers who said, Thomas Paine, who said, a man must partake in the passion and action of his time. That's when he can say he has lived. He must partake in the action and passion of his time. The action and passion of our time is to bring this here to make it worthy for our citizens. We have panelists, and I think we should take those panelists after the distinguished lecture. And that is Professor Adewale Aderemi, Professor of Political Science. Can I see you, please, Professor Adewale? Thank you very much. Professor of Political Economy and Developmental Studies, Director, Democracy and Governance, NILGS. We also have Barrister Malaki Guwumadu. Guwumadu, is he here? Okay, thank you. That's the former president, CDHR. We also have Sir Anowi Anyanwu. Is Sir Anyanwu around? Okay, thank you. They're going to give us a little insight within five minutes. They are deep thinking about the state of Nigeria. But before we do that, let me give you 2 points. First and foremost, it's important to understand that it is not because the guest lecturer spoke extensively about the Constitution, and that is the foundation of a nation. If it is not, why is every nation struggling to have a constitution? That's the truth. Even military people, they understand that the constitution is fundamental. That's why it says, we the people. It told a lie. Because it understands the constitution comes from the people. It says, we the people haven't solemnly, which is false. They did it. We didn't participate in it. Now, it's important to understand some fundamentals. First and foremost, it is not a government that gives a nation a constitution. It is a constitution that gives a nation a government. Government is the consequence of a constitution. Let me repeat it. It is not a government that gives a nation a constitution. It's a constitution that gives a nation a government. In the case of Nigeria, it was a government that gave us a constitution. You must understand the absurdity of this nation. The funny thing is, the military itself gave itself the power to make a law that is co-equal to that of the National Assembly. It understood. We didn't quarrel about that. It took power. And it says, the exercise of legislative power that I exercise must be co-equal to that of the National Assembly. But we know very well that National Assembly cannot give us a constitution. It can only give us a law. And as I said in my book, Constitutional Powers and Duties of the President, a constitution is not law. It is an agreement among the people on how they want to be governed by a government created by them. A law, on the other hand, is what is made by the National Assembly and signed. You can see the confusion. How can a nation with so great minds like the lecturer be in such terrible confusion? On the one hand, they say they want to amend the constitution. They send it to the legislative houses of the several states. And then they bring it back to the president to sign. You can see the confusion. If it is a proper constitution, it does not go to president for signature. Only a law goes to president for signature, not a constitution. But they will send it because the confusion is magnanimous, is huge, is unreachable, it's crazy for a nation with great minds. Second point, it is not the content of a constitution that validates a constitution. It's the procedure of making it. It is not the content. One single lawyer can give you the greatest constitution, Rotimi Williams, the late Rotimi Williams, or even Tunji Abayomi. But it is an invalid constitution. If you, the people, come together and you write a stupid constitution, it's a valid constitution. That's why Nkrumah said the people have the right to govern or misgovern themselves through the constitution. Now look at the Nigerian nation. This nation is so unique. Unique in the sense that different ethnic groups is divinely placed in different geographical locations. There's no nation like that. God put the Yoruba in southwest, Igbo in southwest, their location, Jos in the south, Thieves in the center, Kanuri in the northeast, Fulani in the northwest, permanently. Now, if we want to form a united nation, doesn't it make sense that you should sit around the table in what may be a universal banquet and agree on the terms of your relationship? They refuse to do that. The military came, it gave us a constitution, what is like a writ of summons in Lancaster, where my son went to school. Then the military came, it didn't even have the people, no power, no legal power, no legitimate power to give us a constitution. So when he got to the constitution and he realized that, oh, I don't have the power to give the people a constitution, he said, we the people, which is a lie. There is a problem. And we the people, thank you so much. I have spoken about this. I thought it's only a solitary voice. I didn't know there are great other voices like yours. And there is more. But we must continue to insist that we must have the constitution of the people, by the people, and for the people. Constitution of the people, by the people, and for the